A Lantern, Chapter 22. It is the prerogative of the dramatist to lower the curtain upon a scene and raise it upon a later one, of the storyteller to close one chapter and begin another when time is past. Real life is not so. There is no kind interval of time as the settings of the various experiences shift. No heart-easing period of days between the chapters of life. Life is time's galley slave, forever shackled to its relentless master. If its hardest blow be dealt at 3 o'clock, then 4 o'clock must be met, and 5, and 6, the first dark agonizing night, and the first pale torturing dawn. And so it is unreal, even cowardly, to leave Abby Deal wrestling with her deepest emotions, living two lives, one within herself, racked and tortured, the other, an outward one which met all the old duties and trivial obligations with composure. Leave her in the garden of her Gethsemane, to meet her many months later. Only the children had kept her going. Only her motherhood, whose first characteristic was love and whose second was duty, had kept her hands busy and her head unbowed. These, and one other thing which she could not explain, the unseen presence of Will himself, she told no one. Made no attempt to discuss the experience with any other. But much of the time Will did not seem to be away. Whether the phenomenon were of the spirit world with the metaphysical involved, a touch of the supernatural which no man understands, or only a comforting memory, she did not know. She accepted the solace in blind faith and with soul-filled gratitude. Through what agency came the consolation she could not say, but she felt able to keep in touch with him. There was nothing of the weird about it, no foolish incantations to the dead. He just seemed with her. It grew in time to give her a slight sense of peace. It took from the separation the raw, tearing hurt. They had been so close, so companionable, that she seemed always to know what he would have said or done under any conditions. She grew to imagine she was talking to him, telling him the small inconsequential affairs of the household, just as she had always done, and he seemed to answer. "We had the Lutzes out for supper, Will." That was pleasant, Abby. She knew that she made her own answers, but paradoxically, they seemed not to be. She had known Will's opinions so thoroughly, almost without her volition, the answer sprang to her mind. "The Reinmullers were quarreling today, Will. You know, Will, sometimes I think you and I are nearer even now than Gus and Christine." "That's true, Abby." "I shall never tell anyone," she said to herself. "I know just how they would feel. They would look at me queerly and think I was touched. You do talk to me, Will, don't you?" "Why, of course, Abby girl." And so, like an unseen presence, it came to give her a sense of comfort, until the day on which there would come a reaction and she would plunge into a dark state of depression, during which she would turn upon herself with accusations of a childish belief in her own fragile imagination. And then in time, something would quiet her again. Something, she did not know what. The wind in the lumbery poplars, the spirit of the deepening prairie twilight, the stillness of the star-filled summer sky. Or the memory of a voice saying, "I would go on with you, remembering." The greatest antidote in the world for grief is work, and the necessity of work, and Abby had more to do than she had ever done in her busy life. John was the one upon whom she most depended. All the winter after his father's death, he looked after the stock, and all the spring he worked faithfully putting in the new crop. Many times one of the Reinmullers had helped out, but John had shouldered the greater share of the field work. His presence was the only solution now to the problem of making a living on the place. He was only 18. But in years to come, if he wanted to marry, Abby told herself that he could have a small house built nearby, or perhaps it would be better the other way around, and she and Isabel and Grace could live in the small cottage and let John have the bigger house. John was so much like his father, quiet, faithful, uncomplaining. He had none of Mac's friendliness towards everyone, but a reserve which was close to dignity. Every night all winter after the chores were done, he had cleaned up and with no explanation mounted the enclosed stairs to his own room. What did he do there, Abby wondered, as she built up the fire, so that the room above, heated by a drum on the stovepipe, would be warm enough. It was when she was cleaning the room in the spring that she found the black stone tucked away between a homemade bookshelf and the wall. "John," Abby said to him, "something's on your mind. What is it? Won't you tell, Mother?" She had to work to get it out of him, and then, like one whose resistance has snapped, he turned on her. "It's working on this darn farm all my life. I hate it, I tell you." He had the fury of a reserved person who stores up his grievances until one exploding moment. It reminded Abby of the few outbursts of Will during their years together. Abby put her hand on the back of a chair to steady herself. "What do you want to do?" "Study law." And Will had said that the deals were always for the land. "I think of it all day and then dream of it. And I'm going to, someday." That was like Will, too, Abby thought. To think a thing over for a long time and then come to an irrevocable decision. "But I know what you'll say to that," he spoke almost sullenly. It hurt Abby so to have him turn on her that way. "I'm not unsympathetic, John. We'll have to plan some way it can be done if you feel that way." "Yes, and have you mad and disappointed about it. Why, oh why did children say such things to hurt one?" "No, I'll not be mad," she controlled her trembling lips. "And I'm not disappointed. I'm proud of your desire, John. For just a few moments I was confused." "Then promise me you'll sell the place and take the 2 girls and move into town." "No, John," Abby said with quiet dignity. "I'll not sell. Land is low, and last year's crops were so poor. No, it's my place, and I'm going to stay on it. We'll manage somehow." "Then that settles it. I'll stay too." For long weeks, Abby labored with him. He was such a good boy, so clean and energetic, and so stubborn. Then when Abby had argued over and over again how she could manage by renting part of the acreage to Oscar Lutz on shares and hiring Pete Reinmuller for part of the work she could not do herself, John went away to the university in the fall, with his one suit, a few dollars in his pocket, and the promise of 2 jobs, caring for a professor's fires and a doctor's horses. Isabel entered Weeping Water Academy that fall, doing part-time work in the minister's family for her board. And not once did either she or John ever realize how many times their mother put on an old coat and felt hat of their father's and went out to some of the heavy work herself. Isabel began immediately to make splendid progress in her music under a good teacher from the East. "It's her voice, though, that's going to count," the instructor said. "We must watch it and guard it." In the summer, almost the first minute that John came home, he put on his old clothes and went out to the field to work. But his course was to be long, and Isabel must contain all the music she could get. So Abby began figuring in what ways she could help the 2 more. After several weeks of thinking it over and consulting the boys, she took Oscar Lutz's offer for 80 acres, or half the farm. Oscar paid her $1,000 in cash and gave his note for the other $3,000. "It's not good business to sell for that," Abby said. "I think land's going to be higher someday, but it's now that the children need a little help. I can get along. With the chickens and the eggs and the butter and my pension money, I can keep things going." The crops were poor again. The drought of the year before almost repeated. In spite of the general depression, Henry and Sarah Lutz went away on a trip back to the World's Fair at Chicago. Henry had many irons in the fire, a blacksmith shop, his store, the farms. He and Oscar seemed to get along. They always came out of the big end of the horn, people said. Sarah looked dressy when she started away. She had a flaring black skirt and a white shirtwaist and a stiff black hat, which she told Abby was a genuine Knox sailor. "So's mine," Abby said good-naturedly. She took off her own shabby old hat and twirled it on her hand. "Hard knocks." When Sarah came back, She had some little garnet earrings and a half-dozen spoon with the fair buildings engraved on them and pictures of the Infanta Eulalie from Spain and Mrs. Potter Palmer. In September, Abby left Grace, nearly 5 now, with Sarah and went up to Lincoln to be with Margaret. She drove the team and took along the feed for it to save the $2 train fare that would pay for 4 music lessons for Isabel. She got up at 3 and started at 4. Hours later, at Stevens Creek Bridge, she rested the team under the cottonwoods and ate breakfast out of a shoebox. It showered during the last 3 miles, and the wheels threw mud and the buggy almost mired. The Bakers had moved into a house with a yard and a stable. Dr. Baker's practice was picking up. Although fees were hard to collect, the hard times permeated into all businesses. Abby walked the floor in an agony of sympathy for Margaret. I went through this 6 times, she thought, but this is harder than any of them. Sometimes she slipped into the bedroom. "Mother's here, Margaret," she'd say cheerfully. "Keep up your courage." And the Bakers had a son, Fred Jr., they called him. At home again, Abby found everything all right. Christine had milked the 2 cows and taken care of the pigs and the chickens. The farm activities, thanks to the Reinmullers, had gone right on. Only the clock had stopped. Abby wound the works behind the door with the little brown church painted on the glass. She stood for a few minutes and looked at the homely painted face of the old Seth Thomas timepiece and listened to its sturdy, faithful ticking. "A grandmother," she said to it. "I'm a grandmother. And it's not quite believable." You can't stop time. You can't stop time. You can't. "Yes, you're right," Abby admitted. "We won't argue it." She put the key behind the little brown church painted on the glass and shut the door. "Well, Will," she said to that comrade who was only spirit and memory, "you have a grandson." "I'm pretty proud of that, Abby." And then the next spring, the whole community knew that Mac was going to marry Emma Lutz. Emma, with her mother's beady black eyes and her rosy cheeks and a merry come-hither in her eyes. And apparently the whole community was pleased, for good-natured Emma Lutz was the village belle. Mac was 25, and having been promoted to a window in the Omaha bank with the mystic word teller on it, he was by way of being something of a capitalist in the eyes of his old neighbors. They were married at the Lutz house over in Cedartown on an October evening in 1893. The Lutzes had a new house with a squatty cupola on the southwest corner that looked like a shingled beehive. The ceilings were high, and there were wooden rosettes over all the doors and windows, and some new-fashioned spindles on the stairway, through which little Grace fed wedding cake to the monkeys, actively impersonated by the Oscar Lutz grandchildren. Mac and Emma left for Omaha at once, where Mac had rented a little cottage on Dodge Street. Abby was 46 now. The gray streaks in the red-brown hair were prominent. There was a noticeable slumping of the lithe shoulders, a thickening of the hips. The peasant body of the O'Connors was coming into its own. In all these years, Abby Deal had not done anything with her voice, and she had not painted. But as every good mother lives again in her children, her personal disappointments were assuaged by Isabel giving great promise with her music, and Margaret improving in every canvas she did. So Abby felt that the children were doing the things she had so deeply wanted to do. She realized that the time was long past for her to build any more hopes on developing either of those 2 talents for herself. But she still cherished a secret ambition to write something. "If I could just get down life as I've seen it," she would think, "and people as I've known them. Old Grandpa Deal with his shaggy head and the twinkle in his eyes, and his wit and his patience with Grandma. The story of my mother with her head shawl and her Irish eyes pulling a rose for my father. Isabel Anders Mackenzie trying to make a lady of her little Irish peasant daughter-in-law. The journey out from Illinois with the stolid old oxen and the smell of the burning maple boughs in one's nostrils. The first lonely nights of camping in Nebraska with the silence of the stars and the sky and the quivering of the prairie grass. It was something she could do. She vaguely sensed her power to construct the scenes in writing. She knew that she possessed the emotions which one must feel before she can transfer those feelings to another. It gave her a delightful sense of anticipation on this October day. With the half-crop husked and in the crib, she could begin to write down some of the things she desired. It gave her a feeling of buoyancy that all her hard work could not down, a renewal of youthful desires. By careful management, she could plan her time, so that there would be moments each day in which she could forget everything else and carry out this dream that was as old as herself. If the results seemed clever, the thought gave her a warm sensation of pleasure. She would show them to her children, and then, if they were good enough, there were several ladies' magazines now which printed such things. How proud the older children would be of her, Mac and Margaret, John and Isabel. "Do you think I could, Will?" "I'm sure you could, Abby girl." Yes, that was the answer Will would have made. Always kind, always encouraging. He would have said just that. In the sheer pleasure which the vision gave her, she pulled little Grace up to her and hugged her. "Maybe Mother can find time now to do something she always wanted to do, darling." Grace, looking over her mother's shoulder, pulled away. "Look, Mother, who's that coming?" Gus Reinmuller was driving away from the front gate, and a tiny little figure in black, with a huge old-fashioned bonnet, was hobbling up the path between the cedars, half carrying, half dragging a black old valise. Amazed and uncertain who her visitor might be, Abby went out to meet her. It was Grandma Deal, 80 years old, with 1,000 wrinkles in her little shriveled brown face. "Why, Grandma Deal!" "Well, Abby, I've come to live with you. I'd rather live with you than any of my own blood. It won't be long, though. I shan't last long. Why didn't I die when Pa did? What makes old folks hang on when they ain't no good any more to their relatives? What makes my daughter so hard to get along with?" Abby could scarcely believe it, that Grandma Deal had packed up and come alone out to her. What could she do with her? How could she take care of her? In kaleidoscope fashion, her thoughts tumbled about. Why, it was all she could do to help Isabel at the academy, to give John assistance sometimes, look after the house and farm work, and take care of little Grace. And this last plan, this new thing of writing, she was just planning to do. Why, it would take time to do it. How could she add Grandma Deal to her burdens? Grandma Deal stood in the pathway, the old valise by her side. "Maybe you don't want me," her voice rose thin and querulous. "Maybe you're like all the rest of them. Maybe I'd better go back. I won't go back to Regina, though, that's for sure." "Oh, Will, how can I ever take care of her, too? She's my mother, Abby girl." Abby put her warm, tender arms around the little old black figure. "Why, Grandma, how can you think it? You're Will's own mother. Of course I'll take care of you." Grandma Deal pulled away and looked around her. "Whatever did you set out them cottonwoods for? I can't bear that white fuzz blowing around. What did you face the house south for?" 1,000 wrinkles in her little thin brown face, 1,000 worries under her old rusty black bonnet. One arm around the bent wiry figure, the black valise in the other hand, Abby piloted the arrival into the sitting room, where Grace was crying silently for fear of the queer little old woman. "Why, Grace, this is your own Grandma, Father's mother, and she's come to live with us. We'll give you our bedroom, Grandma, and Grace and I will go upstairs to sleep." "What are you doing to put me in a bedroom on the east side for? Sun's hot there in the summer, and east winds blow on it in the winter." "Well, you try it a while, Grandma, and we'll change the bed if you're not comfortable. Now you rest, and I'll go out and get supper." Oh, where would she get the strength to be patient with Grandma? Out in the kitchen, she stepped to the side porch and looked up at the sky beyond the Lumberty poplars. How could she do any more than she was doing now? Where did a person get help for all the trials of life? Why must she always be doing something for someone else? Why had Will been taken away? How could she assume this added burden without him? Whether it was the spirit world, a touch of the supernatural, the wind in the Lombardies, or only a memory, she did not know, but quite distinctly she heard it. I would go on with you, remembering.